Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this next video lesson. We're going to work with functions that return values. And so I've created this quick graphical user interface. We're going to create a bunch of different functions that are going to return all kinds of different values, such as the minimum of two values, the maximum of two values, sum, difference, product, quotient, and then finally the modulus. We're going to want the user to enter two whole numbers, and then we can continue from here. So let me go ahead and create the names for these various items. So over here in the properties, for this guy over here, we'll just call that txt num1. This guy over here, I'm going to call txt num2. Obviously, the button should be btn submit. These are all labels. So for this label, we'll say lbl min value. LBL min value. This one will be LBL max value. And then you can see the pattern already that I'm using. LBL sum value. This will be LBL difference value. LBL product value. LBL quotient value, and then finally we'll have LBL modulus value. So quick check: txt num1, txt num2, btn submit, LBL min value, LBL max value, LBL sum value, LBL difference value, LBL product value, LBL quotient value, and then finally LBL modulus value. So go ahead and save your work, and then when you're done, go ahead and double click the submit button, so that takes us into the code area. And every time that we start working with our code, we want to type in our declarations, comment, get user input, calculation, and then finally output. Now, whenever you're creating a function, you want to be inside of the class, but outside of any program that you've just double-clicked a button to go inside of its main program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press enter a couple of times. You see that I am outside of the btn submit click, right? But I'm still inside of the class. So here's that curly bracket. Here's that curly bracket. That tells me I'm still inside the class. So you want to make sure that functions are created inside of that class. All right, now to create a function that returns a data type, for example, let's work on this guy over here where it says min value. We want to return the minimum value here. So we are dealing with integers. So I type in the data type of the value that I want returned. And then I create the function name. So let's say that this one's going to calculate min value, say for example. And that's the name of the function. It's going to ask me if I want any parameters. And in this case, I do. I want to give it two different numbers. Specifically, I want to give it the two numbers that the user provided for me so that I can determine which one is the smaller one. So I'll just simply say num1 parameter and num2 parameter. And then I'm going to open and close the curly braces. So the way that this function works, here's the name of the function. Here are the arguments, or the parameters. I have two of them, both of them integers. And then what does this thing return? It returns an integer. Now the reason why you have the red squiggly underline is because we haven't returned anything. Now don't type this. Let me just show you an example. If I said return 10, say for example, then the red squiggly underline disappears because I'm actually returning something. We haven't returned anything yet, so that's why we see that indicating that we need to return something. All right, well, what is it that we want to return? We want to return the smaller of these two numbers. So one of the things that we could do is we could say return, and recall that the math toolbox has a min function. There it is. It returns the smaller of two 8-bit integers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say min, and I'm going to give you num1 parameter. I'm also going to give you num2 parameter, and that's it. So what does this thing do when I call it? It is going to return the minimum of those two numbers. Now, I could have done it a different way. In fact, let me do it a different way just to show you. I didn't have to use that math.min. I'm going to use a more, I wouldn't say wasteful, but maybe not necessarily the most efficient way of doing this. So say, for example, if I say, if num1 par is less than num2 par, right? If this is less than num2 par, then I'm going to return num1 parameter because it's the smaller one. Now, if that's not the case, then I'll have an else statement that says, okay, return num2 parameter. So this one statement is doing the same thing as this statement. I'm just simply determining, hey, is this guy smaller than this one? Well, if that's the case, then return num1 par. Otherwise, if this is not less than, or maybe it's equal to, maybe this is greater than or equal to this, well, still, we would want to return num2 parameter. So either a single return statement or within an if statement. Either one does the same thing. Okay, so we have a function that is going to return the smaller of the two. Let's create another function. So over here, press enter a couple times. Now, some programmers do stuff like this. They'll copy the header of the function, and then they'll put it and attach it to that last curly bracket. But with 2017, the nice thing is you could see this curly bracket belongs to this curly bracket with that dashed line. Kind of helps you see things. And also, in fact, you can minimize it by clicking that plus and minus symbol. All right, so now I'm going to work on my next function. So you see where I am. I'm still inside of my class. And I'm going to create another function called calculate max value. And similarly to the first function that we created, I'm going to type in two different parameters with an open and closed curly braces. Some of you may be wondering, hey, Professor Sleece, how come you always type in par at the end? You don't have to. I could have just typed in num1 here and num2 here. I think it's just a habit that I have that anytime I'm dealing with arguments, if, say, for example, over here I had num1, well, if I have num1 over here, another program might forget that that num1 is not the same thing as num1 over here. This num1 is the num1 that belongs to calculate max value. So for me, it's just easy visually to see it like this, although, of course, it's not necessary. Well, I'm going to use the shortcut approach that I used over here initially, which is simply to return math.max. Look at that. Math.max is going to return the larger of these two integers. So I just simply give them the arguments that were provided for me in the function, and that's it. You could make the argument, hey, why even create a function that you could just simply use the math.max, and that would be a good argument. I'm just simply showing you how to use functions. And so in this particular case, I would not do this in a real-world program. But you can see clearly how this is illustrated. In order for this function to work, you've got to give it two numbers. You give it the two numbers, I will determine what the maximum of those two numbers are, and that's what I'm indicating over here. This is the return data type. All right, let's work on the sum. So over here, again, I'm going to return. I want to calculate the sum. Once again, I need to give you two different numbers. So I'll give you num1 parameter. I'll give you also num2 parameter. And what is it that I'm going to return? I'm going to return the addition of num1 parameter plus num2. Okay. I need to also determine the difference. So once again, we're going to create a function. In fact, why don't I just do this? I think I could just copy this, paste it, and change this from calculate sum to calculate difference. And instead of a plus symbol, we got to change that to a minus symbol. So this will be calculate difference. I got to give you two different numbers. I'm going to return the difference of those two. Another thing that I have to determine is the product. So again, I'll just paste, calculate the product. I give you two numbers. Now the operation over here is going to be multiplication. So that's the asterisk. And we are going to return the product of those two numbers. I need to determine the quotient. So again, I'll just paste, change this to calculate quotient. And that means division, so we'll put that slash right there. Now let me just talk to you really quickly about integer division. You know that 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. But integer division, 5 divided by 2, is actually 2. So let me just write a note over here. 5 divided by 2, and we'll say integer division equals 2. 5.0 divided by 2.0, so we'll call this float or real number division. That is equal to 2.5. So do you see the difference between the two? If you're dealing with a number with a decimal point, which we call those floats, we call them doubles, then you're going to get the 2.5 in this case. If you're dealing with integer division, you're not even rounding up. Let's, in this case, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, so normally you would round up. But notice over here, we just want the integer portion of the answer, which in this case is 2. We are ignoring the fractional part. So when you're doing integer division, 5 divided by 2, you're just interested in the initial number, and you don't round up. Okay, let's work with modulus. So what I'm going to do is say paste, and we're going to calculate modulus. So for modulus, we just simply put the percent symbol. Now let me just remind you, if maybe you've not heard of what modulus is. Modulus is the remainder of. Okay, so modulus. Some people say modulo or mod is the remainder of. So, e.g., for example, if I said, what is 5 mod 2? That's the same thing as saying, what is the remainder of 5 divided by 2? Well, the remainder, let's see, if I say, okay, so what's 5 divided by 2? 2 goes into 5 2 times, the remainder is 1, which in this case we'll say remainder is 1. Let's try another example. Okay, so I'm just going to make something up. What is 17 mod 5? So you would ask, what is the remainder of 17 divided by 5? So 5 goes into 17 3 times. It looks like the remainder is 2. So that's going to equal 2. So what is the remainder of? Okay, let me save my work. So I've got all these cool functions that I can use, and the reason why you create functions is so that you don't do something over and over and over again. You don't type the code over and over and over again. You can just simply call that function to do its job, right? If I want to make pancakes, I pull out the mixer, and I put one of those mixing tools in it, and I mix it. That function of the mixer has a specific purpose that I can use that over and over and over. I don't use that mixer for a hammer. I don't use that mixer for a screwdriver. That has a specific purpose. That's the beauty of functions. What I'm showing you in this particular assignment is that we have functions that can return values. Now, in this particular case, these functions require 2 parameters in order for it to do its job, and it's going to return whatever the result is. Okay, so now I can go back all the way over here to this btn submit click, and in that procedure, now we're going to be working with these numbers. So the first thing that I'm going to need to do is I need to get the user numbers, because the user is going to be entering two numbers over here in these text boxes. So I'll just say int user num1. Say, for example, int user num2. Well, I'm going to get those. Remember, those are inside of text boxes, so I have to convert dot to int32, whatever is inside of that first text box .txt. I'll do the same thing again for the other number. Again, the other text box, I should say. That's in txt num2 .text. Don't forget the .text part. So now that I've obtained the two numbers, now I can perform my calculation. So there's a couple things that I could do. One, I could create a bunch of declarations like min, max, sum, product, quotient. I could do that. Or I could put them directly into the labels. So it's up to you. Why don't I just put them directly into the labels in this particular case? So really, we're going to be kind of performing the calculation and output together as one item. So for example, I have over here minimum, right? So that's LBL min value dot text. All right, so inside of here, I need to put a string, right? Because I'm going to be assigning a text value or a string value to the text property. So that means I better convert. So that's going to be convert dot to string. And I'll just open and close the parentheses, and I'll put my cursor right back inside of the parens. Now this thing expects to return, or is going to be displaying the minimum value. Well, I have a function over here called calculate min value. So I can just say calculate min value. Now calculate min value, I'm going to open and close the parens, and I'm going to put my cursor right back in there. Calculate min value, as you can see here, let me zoom in, is going to need two different values. It's going to need two different integer values. So over here, I have those values, user num1, user num2. So I'll say user num1, comma, user num2. All right, so what I've been able to do is call the calculate min value. That is going to return an integer. I am taking that integer, converting that to a string, and I'm going to place that into the text property of this label. So it's going to put the answer right here. So that's what I meant by I'm doing everything at the same time. I'm calling this, then I'm going to convert it, then I'm going to place this into the text property. Could I have created other variables over here, such as min, max, sum, product, quotient, difference, so forth and so on? Yeah, I could have. And then I could have assigned those different values to the text property. This is just a way of consolidating all of that. So in a similar fashion, I'm going to work with max. And again, I'm going to convert dot to string, open and close parentheses, and then I'll put my cursor right back in there. Okay, so I have a function. Let me collapse this. I have a function called calculate max value. So calculate max value. You need two different parameters. I've got those, user num1 and user num2. Now the reason why I'm getting the red squiggly underline is I forgot to do the closing parens. That's why I typically like, if I open a parens, I like to close it immediately, so that way, if I did forget, I did it initially. Let's see here. It looks like I need to calculate the sum. So we'll say, in fact, why don't I just do this? Why don't I just copy this, paste, and instead of LBL max, we'll say LBL sum. And I'm not going to call the calculate max value. I'm going to call the calculate sum function and send it those two values. So that's another way of doing this. Quickly do a copy and paste, modify. Looks like I've got to calculate the difference. I should just take this guy here. Copy, paste, LBL difference, there it is. And I'm going to call the calculate difference function and send it the two numbers. So let's do the same thing for calculate product. So instead of LBL sum, it's going to be LBL product rather. Right, that's the one that we're working on. And instead of calculate sum, calculate product. After the product, we're going to work on the quotient. Copy. So LBL quotient. And of course, we're going to have to call the calculate quotient function, send it to two values. Finally, I have modulus. So paste, we'll work with LBL modulus. And instead of calculate sum, we'll say calculate modulus. Let's save your work. So I'm just doing copy and paste quickly. You don't have to. If it's easier for you to type it out line by line, please do so. The idea is this. We jump from here, calculate min value, to here. This value, I want you to imagine an arrow. That arrow is pointing to this guy over here. This arrow is pointing to this guy over here. Now what happens is we call this pass by value. So in other words, let's take a copy of this, let's paste it, and let's put it over here. Let's take a copy of this, paste it, and let's put it over here. So if I manipulate num1 par and num2 par, it does not have an effect on num1, user num1, and user num2. These are completely two different items. It's like this. Let's say I have a Frisbee, okay? I write the number 10 on that Frisbee, and I clone the Frisbee. I keep the original, I throw you the clone. Here's the clone right here. I have the original. If you change the clone, you haven't changed the original. We call this pass by value. So pass by value, you are not sending the original. Okay. Later on, we're going to talk about pass by reference, where you really do send the original. That would be as if I have a Frisbee, I write the number 10 on it, I send it to you, you add another 0 to it, you send it back to me. I don't know what the original value was. I now see that my Frisbee has the number 100. And that's the result as a result of sending me the original. Here you are passing by value, which means you're sending a copy of it or a paste of it. You are not sending me the original, which we call that pass by reference. Let's see what happens. Let me save my work, click Start. And I'm going to enter two different integers. All right, build succeeded. And here we go. And I'm going to enter in, say, for example, 5 and 2. All right, so submit. The minimum, yeah, that's true. 2 is the smaller. 5 is the larger. The sum is 7. The difference, 5 minus 2 is 3. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 divided by 2, so that's that 2 that I was telling you about. Because really, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. But you just take the integer portion of that answer, which is the 2. You don't even round up. 2.5 doesn't round up to 3. That's a good exam question I'll ask you. Integer division 5 divided by 2 is rounded up to 3. True or false? False. 5 integer division 5 divided by 2 is 2. It's the 2 part of the 2.5. The fractional part is 0.5. The integer part is 2. Well, the modulus, well, what is the remainder of 5 divided by 2? 2 goes into 5 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. And so that's why you see the 1 there. Yes, question?
Would it have worked if we had put a whole instead of int?
Oh, the double?
Oh,
Or a float?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. So modulus only works with whole numbers. Is that what you're asking about the modulus?
No, in the
Oh.
coding area, could we have
Oh.
like doubles instead of threes?
Sure, you could have. Sure, you could have. Now, having done that, we have to be careful. Like you said over here, I could have said two float or two double, say for example. I could have done that. But I have to be careful with modulus, because modulus basically is going to return the difference of two whole numbers. That's just the way the modulus works. So we would have to like maybe cast it as an integer or something like that. But sure, there's nothing that stops you from turning this into a calculator that deals with two real numbers, say for example. Yeah. Good. And that's it. So this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.